Okay, we will all bring the microphones very close. So you people over there where I was sitting, I know what it's like over there. You can hear us. We have until 4 o'clock. So I think we can at least start by taking some questions that get direct answers before we reach that crisis moment where we start collecting them. So who wants the mic?
Hi, thanks for the papers, both of you. This is a question for Jussi, but maybe for both. I was wondering to what extent we can rethink of remains in terms of surplus value, or not just what exceeds production and material productions, but also what is there to not to be captured by material production. I don't know if you know, but lately there's been a very interesting discussion in this group, which is called, I can't remember the name, will come to me, but they have this discussion about the value form of capital versus an idea of surplus value. And what they talk about is that what remains is the value form of capital. So there is obviously a kind of articulation that they do. I'll tell you the reference after you see, just at this moment escapes me.
You're thinking about Robin Hood Collective, no?
No, the Robin Hood. Sorry, I will tell you. No, it's not the Robin Hood Collective for sure. I know them. It's not them. So yeah, that's my question. To what extent, how can you rethink in terms of surplus value? And value form, because the value form is something that is some kind of abstract form that remains within the production. When you had those pictures of those people that were producing, they were collating, assembling pieces, and there was this kind of symbolic configuration of functions that was retained and gets saved, gets stored somewhere. So how that value remains and is absorbed within capital or can exceed capital. I don't know if this is too complicated, maybe. I don't know.
Most things are too complicated
yes.
for me. Thank you very much, Luciana. It is a really complex question because it goes on a stream that is parallel to the whole question that we're dealing with. I think it is completely relevant, especially with the step that is being taken in relation to move from a certain media theory of the object, or material media theory, to the political geography in which the material media is distributed and produced. So it kind of relates to my interests as well in terms of how do we deal with media before it becomes media? How do we deal with it after it's not anymore media in traditional sense? And we've seen a lot of really interesting work by Ned Rost and others who've been trying to deal with this in relation to logistics as well, to think about supply chain, other formations as constituted of the medial condition, right? So in some ways, some of the work has been a remediation of already existing Marxist theories in many ways. That it's not a revelation to think of the consumer object as that you could methodologically, whether it's speculative methodology or whether it's empirical, to trace it back to its production conditions and the labor and the materials and so forth. So in a way, some of that has been employed as well as part of this mapping of the object, right? So that would correspond to the ways in which, at least an attempt to read an unique kind of object as part of this bigger logic. How it relates to kind of an abstract logic of surplus value, I'm not able to comment on now. I think it's really a relevant way in which to talk about it. But,
Could we pass the mic across to Bonnie right here?
Probably come to later.
Hi, thank you. My question is for Rebecca. I just wondered, I was thinking about what you said. I'm wondering if you would accept the following statement of what you just did, which is not a critical statement. I'm just wondering, so is your, okay, so is your talk, would you think of your talk as a recuperation of the disaster reading from Benjamin of the Angel Novalis, in which that look to the side becomes something really different? In your talk, it moves from the sense of catastrophe that we have from Benjamin, and what we get instead is something that has more of a quality of pleasure, which is a term I felt you didn't use, but it seemed to be circulating throughout your talk, an experience that was circulating throughout your talk. And then I'm looking at this, the Black Lives Matter button, I assume that's what that is, and thinking of how it reoccupies jazz hands, which is what you were also reoccupying. So I wonder how you think about that kind of reoccupation, if it's true, if I've described what you did, part of what you did correctly. And is it, and none of these are criticisms, is it remediation? Is it re-inhabitation? Is it a kind of immortality? So does any of that sound like
Yeah,
what you were
absolutely.
doing?
Yeah, no,
And
absolutely.
what do you make of what you were doing?
What do I make of what I was doing?
Yeah, I mean, like,
well,
is
I
it...
make of what I was doing as sort of putting into space for you to make something which you've just done.
Okay.
And now we get to be in this conversation, so thank
Good.
you. It's a great
Okay.
question. Yep. Hi. So thank you very much, Bonnie. I mean, at first you said recuperation, and then, which scared me, and then you changed it to reoccupation. I really like reoccupation better than recuperation. I like the idea of sounding and resounding. That's why I said, which is another sort of laminating on top of that quote by Benjamin. I made it a riff. I made it a scat. I used other kinds of references to different ways of hearing it on purpose to sort of, you know, change up the media, the listening apparatus, if you will. So I like reoccupation better than recuperation. I mean, recuperation is you know, it shares something with an idea of preservation or rescue. And I'm not thinking about archival projects, and this maybe is in line with what Rick was talking about, I'm not sure, last night, but necessarily as preservation, as much as it is sort of opportunity for reoccupation. On the other hand, I mean, I think there are, if I was, and other people, I was trying to remember all the times I've read, and maybe other folks know in this room, the mention of the sideways glance. It's often mentioned, right? It's mentioned looking awry, looking askance, but what to do with that sort of sideways scene remains open, I think, to different things that we can do with it. I thought I would sort of put my hand to it and try something. Yeah, so it seems to me, though, that it's also, even in mentioning something that, the sideways glance that isn't mentioned in that particular snippet, that bit of detritus, there are other obvious kinds of ways that I'm in league with the Benjaminian methodology here of the dialectical image, if you will, or the shock in the moment of, you know, the thing that you lift out and hold out of the stream of itself to invite a rethinking, which isn't the same as recuperate that image back into its, you know, normal stream of events, but actually to say something different about it or expose the means by which it had been given to pass as something it was not, in terms of the phantasm of a commodity, say. So, you know, I think I'm in that lineage. But there are other, you know, I'm not using only the lineage of historical materialism to do that. I'm wanting purposefully to put in, like Moten is a big person, I think, with, so Black radical tradition kinds of readings that might help do that. And I hope that came through.
Right here, and then Gertrude.
Thank you both for your excellent talks. I really enjoyed listening to both of you. And I found that they resonate in a certain way with each other because Jussi also said that media have parallel lives. They are not just old or new. And I found this topic in both of your talks, actually. But then I was wondering, Rebecca, because you you tried to go away from Benjamin when you said the storm is linear, but I think Benjamin at the same time, because I was thinking, how do we methodologically work with the parallel lives of media? How do we approach them? And I think Benjamin also offers a concept with a leap in the Tigersprung, the leap into history, which is actually something that I found in your talk at work.
Yeah, and that particular kind of reading exists as a fragment within fragment, a thing that is itself not linear. So, but in that very description, which comes around again as a bit of fragment, there's a description of a storm of progress as going from back to front with that reading of that figure. So I'm not trying to make a claim that Benjamin is too linear and we've discovered cross temporal time. That's not my point. So I thank you for that corrective, because I certainly wouldn't want to be read that way. And I certainly, maybe you want to respond to this because it's also to parallel lives of media. But I as not being a media theorist, of course, I think that's obvious. One of the maybe parallel lives of it or not is this actor. I don't know what you do in the room with the outmoded objects. Can you have the actor in there too, the mime? It's not even the jazz hands. It's really the Etruscan mime. How can we have that figure as a medium in the room as well? Or should it not be in the room? That's a question I have for you. There you go.
He has a mic.
No, the mic, yes. I'm not sure if I'm able to answer that directly. I was more like riffing on what Mercedes said in your talk as well. I mean, to start with a pun, I'm sure that there was a lot of Heideggerians in the room very excited about the talk of hands and so forth as the access point to it. But exactly what you kind of, at least in what I kind of picked up, this really exciting way in which it also becomes a commentary to a lot of discussion biopolitics in many ways, because of the move from emphasis on Heideggerian death to much more multiple notions of what is alive, what is not alive. So that really, to me, was an enriching way of understanding temporalities, and also not towards it's much more complex. And it's, for instance, feminist materialism has been very good in this, in terms of multiple temporalities and beyond the death cult of our cultural theory towards a much more complex, vibrant, and multiple times as well. And that became to me really nice as a kind of, and also kind of idea about sites as well, in which these times live.
Okay, Gertrude and then Phil, and then we'll see how long that.
Should we take their questions together?
Okay, yeah, we have 4 minutes. So
We don't
Gertrude
have
and
time.
Phil, and then
So I must say I was on some level really taken by the way you put it in a story, a story about history and how we are creating stories to get history into a kind of science system. So I was interested in the way you described it as a kind of dialoguing principle. Small conversations with the curator about what the meaning of this point is, or what the historical status of the thing is. So it's about uncertainty. So you, as someone who is interested in theater, you wouldn't give up to bring it into, let's say, a realm of theater. And so far, on some level, one can say you limited also the way in which it is significant for you. While for the curator, it was more a coin. So she would just debate what kind of coin it is. So I think all this is interesting in terms of how do we make sense of what remains. Because, let's say, when you go through the touch and the hand on a day at the beach, you may have be in touch with stones that are much older than the coin, but we would never take it as a reference system to think about our prehistory when we were not there. And so on some levels, I was interested, what is this kind of entrance into history that comes with this, interest in seeing something in something? So a coin as a theater ticket. Is it your ticket to take the coin or see it for a metaphor for the theater? It could also be about Mars, that is much older than theater.
the mic needs
It's not really a question.
Oh. Way over.
I have a question that I think is related, but is much more pointed. It seems to me that one of the things that happens in the Benjamin, I mean, there's a question about the relation of present to past, and whether when something that was just phenomenally in the present confronts a residue, there's a relation between present and past there. Now, Jussi at one point said something that interested me a lot. He said, of course we can, and I'm paraphrasing, so if I distort you, let me know. He says, but of course we can look at the document, we can look at the residue, the remain, like a historical document, the way disciplinary history does, and just as an index of something that happened in the past. But, and then you went on to kind of override that's no longer an interesting thing to do. And this kind of relates partly to Gertrude's question about history. And what struck me about that was that confrontation with the remains is a moment which marks a break between present and past. But what happens is in both papers, I have the feeling anyway, that that's becoming repetition and cycle rather than a moment in the present. Now the thing about Benjamin, the thing about the thesis on philosophy of history, it seems to me, is that Benjamin's looking for a moment when that relation of present to past becomes not repetition, but the present, it's a crisis. It's a moment of, the question is how to make that into a moment of crisis, which would be a break, which would be a real entrance into history, right? As such, okay? In action and practice, whatever. And so my question is partly about the politics of the relation between past and present as a break, as opposed to kind of a multitude of overlapping temporalities, repetitions, cyclic gesturings through the remains and so forth. It's about the politics of your or the political implications of your views, if I have them right.
Shall I? Sure. Yeah. No, we need to be really brief.
Both
I know.
you can.
There's a lot of these kind of ways in which forefronting the monument instead of document, I would at least personally, I'm not going to paraphrase Wolfgang, but like in terms of that it's not replaced, but to complement a way in which history becomes something, and it's not only media archaeology, but history becomes something that is performed, and hence repetition itself becomes a formative act to any kind of access to history and time. And that raises the issues that are not forefronted again, like labor and time spent in institutions. So this sort of a, between political economy, that's sort of political situations in which it happens, which would be very relevant discussions of archives and notion of public and private funding and so forth, and then universities in terms of spatialities of these things. So actually I could return this question as somebody who's trained as a historian also to what we didn't think about when I was trained as a historian, is that where does it happen, with what kind of funds, with what kind of situations, and what do these things called labs, for instance, mean in terms of humanities, labor funding and so forth. So there is this weird, suddenly a very Marxist condition of history of this situation in which media archaeology itself also engages with, even if not explicitly. This is a very short question, answer to a big question.
For me, the break is with the idea of the past break present. So I'm breaking with an idea of a linear model that assumes, as kind of a habit, a break between past and present. So there is a break there, but it's in a different orientation to trying on, not saying it's right. There's no claims for what's right here. There's just a trying on, a riffing with an alternative model to see what we can think. So I think that syncopated time, there's lots of breaks, there's lots of kinds of ways of being in breaks within different models of time that are not linear. So that's what I'm sort of playing with. I don't think it means there's no break, just when you deal with overlapping time. But I do think some of this problem of liveness, this goes back to the capital question, sort of has to do with where the length of an interval, if you, for living, okay, I'm about to go somewhere where it would take a long time to answer. I'll leave it at that. I'll chat with you later.
Please join me in thanking UCF